The airport buzzed with energy. Announcements echoed over the PA system, travelers wheeled luggage in every direction, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint smell of jet fuel. Diddy strolled through the terminal, commanding attention as always. Dressed in a paisley blazer so vibrant it seemed to shimmer under the fluorescent lights, white linen pants, and gold-tipped loafers, he was the embodiment of flair and confidence. His oversized sunglasses, perched perfectly on his nose, completed the ensemble. "Gate 32 boarding in an hour," Diddy muttered, glancing at his ticket before striding past a chaotic Starbucks line. He was in no rush. The airport was his runway, and he walked it with purpose, turning heads and earning more than a few smiles. As he neared his gate, the chaos around him gave way to a more subdued energy. Travelers sat in rows of uncomfortable chairs, their faces illuminated by phones, tablets, or the occasional paperback novel. Diddy scoped out the perfect seat, near a charging station naturally, and settled in. He slipped off his sunglasses, revealing sharp eyes that quickly scanned his surroundings. That's when he heard it. A woman's voice, sharp and cutting, carried through the air. "I just think it's ridiculous. People like her shouldn't even be here." Diddy's gaze shifted to a family seated a few rows over. The mother, blonde, immaculately dressed in a pastel sweater and pearls, was speaking loudly to her husband, a man in a navy blazer who nodded along without looking up from his phone. Two teenagers, a boy and a girl, sat beside them, both wearing smug expressions as they scrolled on their devices. The target of the woman's ire was a young black mother seated nearby. She was dressed simply in jeans and a hoodie, her curly hair pulled back into a bun. Her son, no older than 6, sat beside her, clutching a small stuffed dinosaur. The woman kept her eyes down, clearly uncomfortable, while her son looked around nervously, sensing his mother's unease. "I mean, what kind of example is this?" the woman continued, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "They come in here, acting like they belong. It's just unsettling." Diddy straightened in his seat, his lips tightening. Around him, other passengers shifted uncomfortably, their gazes darting between the woman and her family. No one spoke up. The young mother tried to ignore the comments, but the little boy turned to his mom, tugging on her sleeve. "What's she talking about, Mama?" "It's nothing, baby," the woman said softly, though her voice trembled. "Just keep playing with your dino." "Oh, give me a break," the older woman said, rolling her eyes dramatically, acting like I'm the bad guy for telling the truth. Diddy rose to his feet. "Excuse me, darling," he called out, his voice light but unmistakably firm as he approached the scene. "But what truth exactly are we talking about here?" The woman blinked, startled by Diddy's sudden appearance. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" she asked, her tone tinged with irritation. "Just a concerned citizen," Diddy said, flashing a disarming smile. "I couldn't help but overhear you sharing your truth. Care to elaborate for the rest of us?" The husband finally looked up from his phone, his expression wary. The teenagers exchanged nervous glances, but the woman didn't falter. "I was simply saying what everyone else is thinking," she said, gesturing toward the young mother and her son. "There's a certain standard for places like this, and not everyone meets it." Diddy tilted his head, studying her as if she were an alien species. "A standard?" he repeated, his voice dripping with incredulity. "For an airport?" "Yes," the woman replied, her tone defensive. "It's about safety, decorum, respect for the space." "Uh-huh," Diddy said, crossing his arms. "And tell me, what exactly did this woman and her child do to offend your delicate sensibilities? Did they start a flash mob in the TSA line? Run a black market bagel operation out of Hudson News?" The woman's cheeks flushed pink. "I don't appreciate your sarcasm." "And I don't appreciate your bigotry," Diddy snapped, his smile fading. He turned to the young mother, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "You okay, love?" "I'm fine," she said quietly, though her hands were clenched in her lap. "Thank you." "You shouldn't have to deal with this nonsense," Diddy said, shaking his head. Not here, not anywhere. The woman's husband spoke up then, his voice low and deliberate. Look, we're just voicing our opinions. Isn't that allowed? Oh, sure, Diddy said, raising his hands. Free speech and all that, but there's a difference between sharing your opinion and weaponizing it to make someone feel unwelcome, which, by the way, is exactly what you're doing. We're not the problem here, the woman said, her voice growing shrill. This is about maintaining order. You can't just let anyone in and expect things to stay safe. Safe? Diddy echoed, his voice rising slightly. This woman and her child are sitting quietly, minding their own business, and somehow they're a safety concern. Tell me, what do you think they're going to do? Hijack the Cinnabon? A few passengers chuckled nervously, though most remained silent, their gazes fixed on the unfolding drama. You're twisting my words, the woman protested. I never said that. No, you didn't, Diddy agreed, but you didn't have to. Your tone said it for you. The tension in the gate area was palpable. A few passengers began whispering among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with Diddy's boldness, while others nodded approvingly. The young mother sat quietly, her son leaning against her shoulder, his stuffed dinosaur pressed to his chest. One of the teenagers muttered something under his breath, and Diddy's sharp eyes flicked toward him. What was that, sweetheart? He asked. Care to share with the class? The boy flushed, shaking his head. Nothing. Thought so, Diddy said to you. His gaze lingering just long enough to make the teenager squirm. The older woman crossed her arms, glaring at Diddy. You're making a scene. Diddy leaned in slightly, his voice low but firm. No, darling. You're making a scene. I'm just making sure everyone knows who the star villain is. The woman's husband stood then, his jaw tight. We don't have to listen to this. Oh, you absolutely don't, Diddy said, stepping back with a dramatic wave of his arm. But before you pack up your prejudice and march off, maybe take a moment to think about the example you're setting for those kids of yours, because right now, it's not a good one. The family remained rooted in place, glaring at Diddy, who held his ground with unwavering confidence. Around them, the gate area buzzed with a new energy, equal parts tension and curiosity. The situation had reached a boiling point, and the resolution was nowhere in sight. Anyway, Diddy said, Ed, clapping his hands once, we're all adults here, right? Surely we can figure out how to share an airport gate without turning it into a reality show audition. The woman opened her mouth to respond, but Diddy cut her off with a raised finger. Think before you speak, darling. It'll save us all some time. With that, he turned back to his seat, leaving the family fuming and the rest of the gate area buzzing with murmurs. Diddy didn't sit for long. The energy at the gate was charged, the air heavy with tension and unspoken words. Though he had stepped back momentarily, he could feel the weight of the young mother's silent gratitude and the family's simmering anger pressing against him like static electricity. He adjusted his blazer and leaned back casually, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. The family hadn't quieted down. The mother in pearls was still glaring at the young black woman, muttering under her breath to her husband. Can you believe this? She said. He's trying to make us look like the bad guys. All we're doing is speaking the truth. Her husband gave a non-committal grunt, but one of their teenage kids, the boy, seemed emboldened. Yeah, people always make a big deal about nothing. It's like no one can take a joke anymore. Diddy exhaled sharply through his nose. He had hoped that calling out the family's behavior would have diffused the situation, but instead they were doubling down, and worse, they were starting to stir up the other passengers. Across the gate area, a businessman in a sharp suit cleared his throat and spoke up. I mean, the guy's got a point, he said, gesturing toward the teenager. People are so sensitive these days. Everyone's always offended about something. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but just as many passengers shot the man incredulous looks. Diddy glanced around, noting who was silently siding with the family and who seemed too uncomfortable to take a stand. The young mother, still clutching her son tightly, looked as though she wanted to sink into the floor. Her boy glanced up at her with wide, questioning eyes. Mama, he whispered. "Are we in trouble?" "No, baby," she murmured, stroking his hair. But her voice cracked on the last word, and Diddy felt his chest tighten. He rose again, more deliberately this time, and strode toward the center of the gate area. If the situation was going to escalate, it wasn't going to happen while he sat idly by. "Excuse me," Diddy said, his voice carrying easily over the murmurs. The businessman turned toward him, surprised, as did several other passengers. "But did you just say people are too sensitive?" The man straightened his tie, clearly unprepared to be addressed so directly. "Yeah," he said, his tone defensive. "I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion, right?" "Oh, absolutely," Diddy replied, nodding. "But there's a fine line between having an opinion and using it to make someone else feel small. And, darling, you just tap-danced right over that line." The businessman frowned. "I wasn't trying to make anyone feel small, I'm just saying—" "What you're just saying," Diddy interrupted, his voice sharpening, "is that it's okay to dismiss someone's lived experience as oversensitivity, which, in case you're wondering, is exactly the problem we're dealing with here." The businessman opened his mouth to respond, but faltered under Diddy's unwavering gaze. Behind him, the family of four was watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. "Why are you even getting involved?" the woman in pearls demanded, standing now. Her voice was loud enough to draw the attention of nearby airline staff. "This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," Diddy shot back, turning to face her. "Because when someone tries to push a woman and her child out of a public space, especially with thinly veiled bigotry, I'm not just going to sit there and sip my latte. I'm going to stand up and say something." "Bigotry?" the woman gasped, clutching her pearls as though she'd been personally attacked. "How dare you?" "Oh, I dare," Diddy said, stepping closer. "I dare because you're not even trying to hide it. You're sitting here, in front of everyone, pretending that you're just worried about safety and decorum, but what you're really saying is that you don't think she belongs here. And let me tell you something, darling. She has just as much right to be here as you do." The woman's face turned red, her husband standing now as well. "You don't know us," he said, his voice low and angry. "You don't know anything about what we believe." "I don't need to know you personally," Diddy replied, his tone steady but fierce. "Your actions are doing all the talking." By now the gate area had gone completely silent. Airline staff had gathered near the counter, watching the scene unfold with a mix of concern and hesitation. No one seemed sure whether to intervene. The young mother spoke up then, her voice trembling but determined. "Thank you," she said, looking at Diddy. "I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to make things worse." "You shouldn't have to," Diddy replied gently. He turned back to the family. "And that's the thing, isn't it? People like you count on people like her staying quiet. You count on the discomfort of others to let you get away with your behavior." "That's not true," the woman snapped, her voice shaking now. "We're not bad people. We're just concerned." "Concerned about what?" Diddy asked, spreading his arms. "A mother and her child waiting for a flight? What exactly do you think is going to happen? Or are you just concerned because you've already made up your mind about who she is, based on nothing but the color of her skin?" The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her husband placed a hand on her arm, his expression a mix of anger and embarrassment. Behind them, the teenagers sat frozen, their eyes darting between their parents and the crowd. Before anyone could speak again, an airline staff member stepped forward, a calm but firm expression on her face. She was a tall woman in her 30s, her badge reading Supervisor. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, addressing the group at large. "Yes," the woman in pearls said quickly, pointing at Diddy. "This man is causing a scene." "Oh, honey," Diddy said, shaking his head. "If there's a scene here, you're the one who started it." The supervisor held up a hand. "All right, let's calm down." "Sir?" She turned to the young mother. "Is everything okay?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "I'm fine now," she said quietly, glancing at Diddy. The supervisor nodded and turned back to the family. I'm going to ask everyone to return to their seats and keep the peace. This is a shared space, and we won't tolerate behavior that makes anyone feel unwelcome." The woman in pearls bristled but didn't argue. Her husband muttered something under his breath, and the teenagers stared at their phones, avoiding eye contact. Reluctantly, the family sat down. As the tension eased, several passengers clapped softly, their applause growing louder as Diddy returned to his seat. He gave a small wave, his expression calm but triumphant. The young mother leaned over as he sat. "Thank you," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Diddy replied, his voice soft but firm, "because silence is the same as approval, and I don't approve." The little boy grinned at Diddy, holding up his stuffed dinosaur. "You're really cool," he said. Diddy laughed, tousling the boy's hair. "And don't you forget it, baby. A." As boarding was called, Diddy watched the young mother and her son walk toward the plane, their heads held high. The family of 4 followed shortly after, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Diddy waited until the last boarding group, savoring the quiet triumph of the moment. As he walked down the jet bridge, he smiled to himself. Confronting prejudice wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And if there was one thing Diddy knew for sure, it was that standing up for what's right would always be in style.